put your name, your school, and your role in the chat. We're going to do a quick poll after I go over the agenda. I'm going to do updates and review the February data. Then we're so fortunate to have our partner, Hedy Chang, to talk with us about deepening relationships with priority groups. And we're going to have a focus and spotlight on Erica Trainee from Bristol. She's the Director of Climate, Culture, and everybody's covered up my slides. So, and then we're going to have time to talk to each other and have a breakout. Then we're going to talk about the spring slump resources. We all know spring is tough. And so are you ready for the slump? That's what we want to know. And we want to help you if you're not. Then we'll have some closing. So at this point, we have about 45 people. Steve, if you want to launch the poll, we have a question regarding climate and culture in the school. Where you work, and this is just your own personal feeling. It doesn't have to be based on data. We're asking that you rate your feelings about your school's current climate and culture. Is it more positive and back to some routine now that COVID is getting behind us? You have a single choice. It's so much better. It's just kind of much better. It's about the same as it's been all year. It's trending downwards. It's actually getting worse because of spring or whatever, or we're becoming quite problematic. So how do you feel about the school climate and culture, where you are and your role and where you work? I'll give folks a minute or two to do that. If anybody has any questions, just let me know. I don't see any answers. Are people answering?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'll see once I end the poll.
Oh, you see it. Okay. I don't see it. Okay.
Yeah. Once I end the poll.
Okay.
I'll display the results. We have about 75%. Just waiting for a few more coming in.
All right. What do you say?
Yeah, we've got about,
if you haven't answered, now's your chance. Let us know how you're feeling.
We'll end the polls shortly.
This is going to be very scientific and helpful.
We're almost there, Kari.
Okay.
Okay. Here are the results.
Let's see. Much better. About the same. And some are still at about 18% are trending downwards. At least it's not much worse. We don't have becoming quite problematic. But we have a lot of about the same and much better. And about 50% of people who responded, it's much better or so much better. And so that is amazing and a celebration. I just, for those of you, it's about the same or trending downwards. Let's hope with the spring, a nice weather and, some freedom around the mask and people feeling better, we're going to start to see a change everywhere. So I really appreciate your participation in the poll. It's very helpful.
Great.
So we're going to go to the next slide, please, Steve.
Yeah. Where is this going? Hold on. Here it is.
Okay, so what's new at CSDE? All right, so a shout out to the commissioner, Charlene Russell Tucker, who had her confirmation maybe 2 weeks ago. So she is officially Commissioner Russell Tucker of the State Department of Education. You can read more in her statement in the QR codes there when I send the slides out, but we're excited now to have Commissioner Charlene Russell Tucker confirmed by the General Assembly. Next slide, please. So tracking data early and often, I just always share this. The February data will be updated today, I believe. So these links will go right to the February data. So you can check your attendance data and chronic absence data. I put this little picture up here about Got Filters because it's really important that you have somebody on your attendance teams who knows how to use spreadsheets, who knows how to set filters and sort. It's not an easy thing to do, and these are big spreadsheets, but I just wanted, if you don't know how to do it, it's not hard. You can actually just give me a call and I'll show you how to do it. But it's really helpful for finding your data in those big spreadsheets. Next slide, please. Okay, so at the February attendance engagement community of practice, if you were here, you know that Ajit Kapala Christian went over the protocol for examining monthly attendance. There's links in the protocol to the updated data every month. Those links are updated, so you can go through that protocol to see how you are how your schools and your districts are doing for daily attendance and chronic absence. And the next slide, I can go on to the next slide. This is a chart graph, and you can see we said as February here, there's a question and it wasn't ready as of the last time I looked, I think this morning, but the good news is we've turned it around a little bit. We have each group went down a bit in February. Attendance has started to go down now that, you know, Omicron is behind us and we have masks are not required in a lot of districts. So we're going in the right direction, and that is something to celebrate. So I just want to take a moment and thank you all for all of your hard work, and hopefully we'll continue to see an impact over the next couple months. Next slide, please. This is how I look at data, and it with our state attendance team. We looked at how are the grades doing compared to before the end of last year. And so the gray line is chronic absence at the end of last year. Still COVID, been through a year last year with a lot of remote learning, but we can see now that attendance, chronic absence is even higher this year, the blue line, than it was last year at this point in time. And that's concerning. And we're especially seeing higher rates and growth in our kindergartners and our high school students. And this is important for us to know as a state agency and with our partners, what can we do to support the districts and how do we bring resources to them? You can do this with your schools. The protocol tool will help you do this so that you can look at chronic absence for or daily attendance for all your schools and see, you know, where you might need to give some more support. Next slide, please.
Kari, I'm sorry, do you mind if I just jump in for a second? Because I think it's really important that you're like modeling how we're making decisions of support. And you mentioned kindergarten and 9th grade. I know so many districts are thinking about transition type supports of how are we welcoming our pre-K to K families or new families in our district, you know, that middle school shift and that high school shift. Really important that we're like already, I mean, I'm sure many of you are already thinking about it, but being really intentional about tracking what you're doing and then how it's working. So getting ready to set up a system for how you're gonna really look at the students who participate in transition events, you know, over the spring, summer, and what is their attendance going to look like in the fall and next year? And did that, you know, really concentrated effort make a difference on their attendance? And I think that's something to think really critically about.
The other thing I would just add in, Kari, is that if folks do that for each of their schools, you might find some schools that have better kindergarten or 9th grade attendance. And if they do, it could be that they actually have a practice or something going on that others could replicate. But just, you know, sometimes you have a district trend and then you have the positive outlier within the mix.
Absolutely. We've had a lot of questions from districts around summer planning for transition years, for instance, for 9th grade. And Amanda and I were talking last night about looking at what you did last year for 9th grade transition and what worked. Those students who had a bridge opportunity last year, how was their attendance this year? So if you're planning the same thing you did last year, how do you know if last year's interventions were successful or what was successful with your interventions? Any questions? Next slide, please. This is a way to monitor how interventions are working. If you are a district and you are putting resources into particular schools and you want to see who's on track and who's not on track. I did this just with 6 random LEAP districts because I monitor monthly trends. And at the bottom, you'll see that I started with the end of last school year, and then there are chronic absence rates for September through February. Some of them you can see more distinct drop from January to February, so we're really excited about that. But the orange ones are the ones that are concerning, so we would target for support. You see that one of them started pretty high in end of last year, but had a nice drop in September, but then just continued to go up and is still starting to plateau a lot. And then we have the blue line district, which is improving, right? They really dropped from last year to September, and they're kind of holding on throughout Omicron, and that's a really good sign. You see the state average with the black dotted line, and then the 3 districts that are doing well. Their attendance is still high, but compared to state average, they're doing well, because the state average in itself is around 25% in February, down from 26 in January.
And Kara, just to clarify, this is chronic absence rates, correct?
These are chronic absence rates. That's right. Thank you. Any questions? Okay, next slide, please. So this is a slide that our performance office put together. They analyzed our fall semester data, and I'm going to go through these kind of quickly, but these are some of the findings. We know that over 98% of all school days this year are in person, compared to only 40% last year. And about 30% of students across the state have experienced at least one remote day. Average for all students who have remote days are 5 remote days. And then attendance on in-person days in 21-22 is lower than in 2021, because even mildly symptomatic children may be kept home without access to remote learning. And students had access to remote learning last year when they might not this year. And we also know that attendance on remote days this year is dramatically lower than last year, because remote learning programs may be more stopgap and not as robust as last year, so students may not be participating. Students without high needs are showing bigger declines than those with high needs, which students without high needs is still much lower chronic absence rate, but they've seen a bigger growth than kids without high needs. We know that Omicron played havoc in December and January, but things are stabilizing in February. And we're still in a pandemic. The biggest challenges this year are maybe not technology or school closures, but still some teacher quarantines and student quarantines, but we see a lot of the absences pertaining to student engagement, behavior, and mental health. Next slide. I'm gonna let Hetty do this one. It has to do with the predictive value of chronic absence data. Hetty, are you comfortable with doing this one, or would you like
Sure. So we decided not to, guys, give you these bar charts that might confuse you, because they were confusing all of us, but this is how I would interpret it. Your data from the current year shows that chronic absence is still a really important indicator and sign that a kid is likely to be chronically absent. What we saw was the majority of kids who were chronically absent last year, who are participating in in-person learning, so we looked at it across modes of learning, about 55% are still chronically absent this year. So still a much greater likelihood, if a kid was chronically absent last year in in-person learning, even if they had mostly in person, to be chronically absent. But it was even more pronounced if the kid was in remote learning. So if you had a remote learner who was chronically absent last year, about 70% of them are chronically absent this year, which means chronic absence and being in remote was a challenge, very predictive. And then the other thing that we saw was challenging is almost 28% of the kids who were not chronically absent last year in remote learning are chronically absent this year. This is much higher than if kids were in-person learning. So I think the bottom line of this is, if you're trying to see who are kids who you might focus on, a kid who was chronically absent and remote is that they clearly need a lot more support. Kid who was chronically absent in any situation, but also kids who were remote, you might want to make sure that they're doing okay this year, because a lot of them still haven't re-engaged fully. All right.
Right. Next slide, please.
So I think this is now shifting over to me, Kari.
Yes, it is.
Turn
Thank
me
you.
over once. So we just thought it would be really helpful for you to all have just a good sense of what's happening. Clearly, things are still very challenged. Your rates of chronic absenteeism are still extremely high, but as Kari said, you're seeing some signs of hope. I also want to remind you all that chronic absence is something that it's a percentage of time, right? So if you've had 120 days of your school year now, a kid who has 12 days, they're chronically absent at this moment. But if you can keep them from getting to 18 days by the end of the school year, they will not be chronically absent, right? So you still have a moment to intervene. This is why Connecticut has its data the way it is, because you can find all of those kids who are still less than 18 days. Some of them are chronically absent at this point in time, but if you can stop them from having more days, they won't be by the end of the year. I also want to suggest that this is a time to think about engaging both. You both want to prevent kids from getting more chronically absent and making sure, again, this is about making sure they're engaged in learning. And then the kids who are, let's say they've already had 18 days, you still want to connect with them because chronic absence is a sign that they need deeper engagement and support because you want them to come back next year. You want them to do well. And what you do this year can set the stage for next year. So just wanted to keep that in mind. And so this is about using your data in chronic absence to think about who are your priority student groups and think about how do you deepen relationship building to them. Can you go next slide, please? So I'll go through quickly on this. You guys have heard me possibly before in this, but when you see high levels of chronic absence, it could mean that kids are not feeling physically or emotionally healthy or safe. They don't feel that sense of belonging, connection, support, or they don't have academic challenge or engagement, or there's a challenge of overall adults and students feeling well and feeling and having that emotional competence so they can support each other. When we're all tired, we're not so good with each other, you know? And what it means is we have to invest even more heavily in those relationships and making sure that we're understanding and addressing any of these, when any of these positive conditions of learning are missing. Next slide. That means really deepening and ensuring you have a tiered support approach to attendance. And we had added in during these last 2 years, this notion of foundational whole supports. And remember, they build on each other. So you need strong foundational supports to support good tier 1, tier 2, and then tier 3 interventions. And the more you have strong at the base, the less you'll need to invest too heavily on the top. But even reaching out to kids in a tier 2 kind of way or tier 3 kind of way is more effective when you have strong foundational and tier 1 supports. Next slide. And what we know is that one of the challenges of the pandemic has been an eroding of some of these key building blocks that keep kids in school. And so one of the things you're balancing is making sure if one of these or more of these building blocks, enrichment activities, positive relationships, active family and student engagement, advisories to the etiquette, and if one or more of these, having a safe, welcoming school climate, then that's something that you need to really focus on so that even all the rest of your interventions are effective. Next slide. One of the things that Dr. Bob Alphans has talked about is that in a way, what we are realizing that school connectiveness as we move through the remainder of the school year and into next year is more important than ever. Kids are more likely to do better when they feel connected to school. And how do we know they're connected to school? They're connected when they believe there's an adult in that school who cares about them, when they have a supportive peer group, when they're engaged in some kind of pro-social activity, and when they feel welcome and a sense of belonging. This connectedness, especially in given what's happened in the pandemic, is more essential than ever. Next slide. Oh, can you click through? So this is about, just keep clicking, so all the bubbles appear, sorry. An animation that didn't work quite so well, but so we know that kids feel comfortable going to school when they feel hope for a better future, faith that school is where they can succeed, voice in the decisions that help affect them and their kids if they're a parent, and access to the needed supports and services. And those relationships that we want to put in place help instill all of this. Next slide. So one of the things that we've mentioned before, but go back, please, is that it's really important to do a bit of relationship mapping. You can use relationship mapping combined with chronic absence data to really get a sense of your kids. Now, let's go to the next slide. And it is my pleasure to have Erica Trainey to join us here. She is with Bristol Schools. Erica has been just so thoughtful. And what we've heard loud and clear from you all is that it's really helpful when you guys can hear from a district in your midst about how they're doing this work. So Erica, this is a spotlight, and you've now been appropriately spotlighted through the Zoom. I'll join you now. Tell us about Bristol and what do you know right now about who is chronically absent, which groups are most affected? So let's start with just that question. What are you seeing from your own data?
Right. So what we're seeing from our data is a lot of what you actually just shared previously. A lot of our data right now is showing, which is kind of predictable, that a lot of our students who were fully remote last year are chronically absent this year. So, and we are seeing a correlation between our students who are chronically absent as well as our students who are struggling emotionally with anxiety, depression coming off of last school year, and even students who struggled prior to that. So we are definitely seeing a correlation between our students who were fully remote last year. We're also seeing when we dive deep into our data. Also, we are seeing our students who are homeless have a higher rate of chronic absenteeism this year. Our Hispanic community is showing a higher rate of chronic absenteeism this year. So those are things, and our transition years, which is normally how it's always been. What we are seeing more this year, our elementary schools are in much better shape than our middle and high schools in regards to chronically absent. And I do believe as we're diving a little bit deeper, there's a correlation with social emotional learning and engagement and attendance. So I think our elementary schools have a slightly stronger foundation with the SEL than maybe our high schools and elementary schools do. So I do think that there's a correlation between that.
So I'm hearing a little bit, Erica, that in some ways this continues traditional patterns, like the groups that struggled with chronic absence continue, and then you're adding on some kids who weren't struggling before, but who you're now seeing, and particularly maybe around social emotional issues.
Exactly. So some of our higher achieving students, right? Like our students who weren't on our radar before, that kind of that we didn't have to worry about. This year, they're kind of popping, as we say. We're like, what's going on? So students who we didn't have issues with attendance wise or social emotionally are having issues this year. So we are definitely seeing that as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you helping those schools that you're working with know whether these chronically absent students are connected to adults and other students? And Eric, I know you sent in a few slides this morning, so I don't know if this is the moment where we would want Eric, our friend Stephen, to pull up any of those in explaining some of this.
Yeah, so if you want, you can pull it. So right here, this is just kind of our overall. So in Bristol, one of our district's priorities is to have 100% of our students be able to identify an adult within the building that they feel connected with. So our goal is to know every scholar by name, strength, story, and need. So that is one of our district's priorities. So all of our schools, when they have their school improvement plans, all of our school administrators have to write a goal as to how they're going to facilitate that. So we are very fortunate in Bristol. We started last year. I think it's the third slide that I sent you. We have Panorama. We were able to do a social emotional. Yep, we were able to do a social emotional and a climate survey for all of our students. So we did ask the students the question, you know, do you have a teacher or other adult from school who you feel like you can count on to help you no matter what? So in our grades 3 through 5, the caring adult data showed 93% of our students felt that they had a caring adult, and our middle and high schools were at 74%. So you can see in our elementary, there was a slight improvement from the spring. This is our fall data. We're about to give it out again. But from that, what we were able to do was we were able to identify who those students were that that didn't have a caring adult, and we were making sure that the schools knew who those students were. So when we have our monthly attendance meetings, we're able to look at those lists and also share the list with our school social workers to make sure that those students were able to find somebody to connect with. So
Erica, remind me with Panorama,
Yep.
can you, it associates also back to an individual student, right? Not just giving you a district trend. So
Right.
if you're working with a particular student and you're seeing their chronic absence, they could also be on Panorama and checking how that kid feels connected.
Right. So when you use the Panorama data, it does do the SEL. So you can pull that up. You have all the individual data, and then each question. So like if I was to click on this question, it breaks it down by category. So it breaks it down by race, ethnicity, if they're special ed, if they're 504, it breaks all that data down for us, and it helps us. So once our social workers or behavior interventionist, if they create groups and stuff like that, you can also do the check-ins with the students and redo this. But a lot of this stuff you can also do in a Google form, right? If we don't have the money to have a Panorama in your district, it's asking the questions to identify the student, and then making those connections, making sure that there's a bridge. But when you look at attendance, I always tell my schools that once you start noticing chronic absenteeism, that's the first indicator that there's something bigger happening, which is why we need to connect with these families. That's why these parent meetings or home visits are so important. And when we're there, it's not just to lecture the parents, but to find out what's the barrier, right? Like, because sometimes it could be due to academic issues. It can be due to having to babysit. It can be due to so many things. But once you see attendance falling and becoming chronic, it's the first indicator that something bigger is happening.
So that's a perfect segue, Erica. I wanted to talk about, you know, how do you gain insights? How do you understand what's going on and actually support families? And one of the things that we talked about is whether you all ever used our caring conversations approach. So let me just take a quick riff mode. Keep going, Stephen. So after Erica's Bristol slides, I think.
There's
All right, Hetty, Kari had a question, and there's just a few some questions in the chat about Panorama and some of the data that.
Okay, sorry. I'm
Yeah,
not seeing
I don't
those.
have a question. I wanted to just say there's questions in the chat that may be relevant to what we're talking about right now. So Christine from Killington asked, is this a software? Christine, I'm not sure if you're talking about the mapping or the or Panorama.
So if she's asking about Panorama, it's a climate and SEL survey that we were able to purchase as a district. So you can it's a really neat tool. So you're able to create questions. We have it so we can kind of triangulate the data. So we ask our students, our parents, and the staff. So, and a lot of it is the engagement in climate and culture that we were talking about. So it's neat to get the the students' perception, but also the parents and the teachers. Because sometimes, like you were talking about the mapping, that's so important. And oftentimes, though, what we were finding is when we were doing some of the mapping and asking the teachers, we had a much higher rate when we were asking the teachers than when we asked the students. So that's why we felt it was important to ask the students specifically.
Now, Erica, my understanding with Panorama is this is a survey that goes out to every kid who's in Panorama. This is a software system that links with your data system.
Yep.
And then the survey data, because it's connected, but you both know the information as an overall trend, but it's not anonymous. You can share it anonymously, but it's also in your system because you can know it by particular kids.
Yeah, so it's in our system and we can trend the students. So like this is our second year. So we're able to see, we can't see their climate. We can't see their climate information, but it is specifically the SEL goals. It does the 5 CASEL competencies, and they ask questions around that. And so we can see the specific student data and
okay, and it's going to all kids though. It goes
to all kids in grades 3 through 12. We're not allowed, they don't offer it due to the validity of the data, because kindergarten, first and second grade students might not be able to answer the questions or understand them. So it's grades 3 through 12.
I just want to chime, Penny, if I could just chime in quickly for a minute, because I think there's a couple of resources that I just want to put out to the broader audience, because Bristol has a really coordinated and clear plan. Kari dropped it in the chat. We are doing the DESA statewide for an SEL tool that is free to districts. So it's similar to a Panorama SEL version. And that is kind of a great resource. Actually, it's not kind of, it is a great resource for districts and a tool that I encourage you to check out. There's info sessions coming up. The school climate survey piece, which Erica, I'm so glad you mentioned that part, because I've been having lots of conversations with districts about that. You said it, I think, perfectly, that attendance is a symptom of something bigger, and triangulating data and using other data sources to be able to say what's happening with the student, what's the bigger picture. School climate data, which is still a legislative requirement to be done every other year with students, staff, families. Erica, you outlined that all really perfectly. I'm going to take you on the road with me too. But thinking critically that I have some great resources, that Panorama does have tools, but there are free resources. If any of you are implementing PBIS in your schools or districts, there's a free resource there. So I'll drop a link in the chat directly to that too. And I'd be willing to have conversations with you all around school climate data collection and how you can use that with your attendance efforts.
All right, thank you. I want to point out one that Christina Morales pointed out, that Panorama does make its questions available for free if anyone wants to look at it, and then you can use other systems because it does cost to use it. There was a question of, do you have some sample actionable goals from administrators' school improvement plans on how to address the district priorities?
I do. I'm looking across the room at the woman I share an office with. We do have some. I don't think I can pull it up.
Maybe what we can do is send that out afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, because we still have quite a bit to
get
through, and we're almost through our amount of time that we have with you, Erica. But I wanted to. So, Kari, I know we want to be responsive to questions, but I'm going to ask that we make it through the interview with Erica, and then we see how we want to use time. So my question was, so now you know who's kids, the question about how do you deepen and expand and offer supports to families. And so if you could, Stephen, keep moving. My question was how you might have used sort of a caring conversations approach. So how do you go from knowing that the kid might have some challenges to figuring out how to go work more deeply? And I wanted to offer up, this is something that Attendance Works had developed. Erica says she uses something pretty similar, maybe looking at some of these guidelines, but it's a process. And often when we try to find out what's going with families, we too often start with the third step of inform. Oh, you've missed these many days. And it's actually off-putting. We forget that if this is about relationship building, we have to start with learn, then go to share, then inform, then discuss, and then arrive at a plan. And if you click to the next slide, Stephen, there's a little bit more, learn and share is finding out about a family, finding out how they're doing in school now, maybe about their hopes and dreams, depending on where you are in the year, and having a conversation, sharing positive things that you've seen about a student, sharing your own vision, maybe for, I have lots of hopes for Erica. She's such an amazing artist, whatever you want to say there. So you're building, and families understand that you see their strengths, maybe talking about to them as parents about how asking them for their kids' strengths, so that you know how to build on them. The next slide. After learn and share, then you start to inform. And this is where using a bit of a calendar can be really helpful. You identify patterns, you look at what concepts kids might have missed. Next slide. And then after inform, if you could, you can start to discuss what helps a kid show up, what motivates them, what would help them reduce absences and increase engagement, address the lost learning time, and even offering up, getting people to think about their help banks. And then the last slide is about then starting to arrive a plan and having something, and having a plan for checking in. Let's go to the last slide. This is just for you all to have. We also have a worksheet where people can kind of think about, what they would do, and even use it to prep. So Erica, going back to you, and we can go back to the questions here. How have I think you've used a Caring Conversations approach a bit in Bristol. How have you used it? And then also please tell us what else you're doing beyond that.
So we use a lot of your stuff. We love attendance work. So some of the stuff that we have done when we have our home visits, we did create a home visit binder, right? So early on in COVID, we were all going home. We were getting a lot of information, like you were saying in your Caring Conversations. We need to learn, and then we need to share out, and then create our plans. So when we have our meetings, or when we do our home visits, it was really important to us to get as much information as possible to use and make those community connections as well. So making those positive relationships and creating a plan that makes sense for the families. So like you were saying, within our schools, we have created, so sorry to focus back on I looked at my other screen there. So what we have done, so when we do the home visits, we created a Google form. So finding out the information that you have when you're there, putting it in, so that way it gets shared out with not only our attendance teams, but our student support teams. So while they're working on the individual plans for students, they're able to see the attendance data. What's the barrier? What's been stopping them from coming? And then when they're at the home, having all that information right there. If a family provided something that was a barrier, right? Well, here's the resource that you can have immediately. Here's how you can log on. Here's how you can see. Even like your calendar, you look at that and it's something as simple as a blank calendar, but when you sit with a family and a student and you have them fill it out and highlight the days that they've missed so they can see a visual of how many, and like you said, look for the trends, and then create a plan and have that for the family to look at. But definitely creating the goals and letting students know, and tying that back into the school.
And Erica, as you think about the kinds of barriers you've seen, what are trends or strengths that you've seen in families? What are there any overarching insights that you've gained about kids and families?
Okay, so there has been, if we look back and we think, a lot of it before was parents working before school, after school, and having an older sibling babysit. That was a big barrier. So even helping families apply for Care for Kids and getting them enrolled in a before and after school program is huge. And even looking at our individual school policies, right? Like one of my schools years ago had, if you were tardy X amount of times, then you would have to serve a detention, right? So speaking with the students, they're like, yeah, I don't want a detention, so I don't come at all. So really their tardy policy was creating an attendance policy, because the kid's like, if I don't come, then I don't have to serve a detention. So in their mind, that was a better alternative. So kind of listening to the students, we're like, okay, we need to stop that because that's not helping. So then it helped improve the chronic absenteeism rate in the school.
Hey, Erica, one other question I
Yeah.
have for you on how do you connect with kids is that
Mhm.
I think you've done some work to look at the strength of relationships and the perspectives of staff and the perspectives of students about those relationships and whether they feel like they can talk to staff about what's going on. What have you heard there?
Mhm. So it was what we have found. It's been interesting, and as we're, like we said, right, creating these relationships and having the kids share out more. And so our younger students this year, 4 of our elementary schools have been fortunate enough to create. They have this wonderful after school activities where they're there till 6 o'clock. They have tutoring, they're eating dinner, they're having these programs. And what we're finding is it's not necessarily the teachers that they're connecting with, right? It could be the custodians, the school secretaries, anything. So we need to ask the students who their adult is. We found that's more important than asking the adults who they're connected to. So having the student voice, having the students be involved in our climate and culture meetings, right? Oftentimes as adults, what we're saying what we think the kids need, but we're forgetting to ask them. So we've been having them become involved in the climate and culture meetings and hearing from them their voice as to what the issues are and what the barriers are and how they can feel more connected within the schools. So we do know, looking at social emotional learning, you can see the schools with a stronger social emotional learning, there's higher academic achievement in those schools and better attendance rates. So we created that. Yeah.
So, and I'm gonna have us do what, if you were to say the one or the two biggest barriers that get in the way of this, what would you say they are?
Right now, it is people are tired. Our adults and the kids this year is what it is. So what we have found, we as a district, we created a climate, culture, and engagement team. So we're trying to help teachers as much as possible, making sure that every student has equitable resources and time. So creating our attendance teams, we have our district attendance teams and our school attendance teams, and helping them create plans and making sure that it's being done with fidelity and making it as easy as possible so people know what's expected on their attendance teams. We're doing this on this day, this on that day, and who's doing what. So making it as easy as possible so that way the routine, people aren't feeling more on their plate, as well as like our social emotional learning and engagement, right? We're trying to create specific lessons to share out for people so that way it's not more on the teacher's plate, because that really is the barrier this year. People are tired. So creating as much as possible, having uniforms and plans and things like that has been helpful this year.
Erica, thank you so much. You are doing amazing work. And with this, I want to shift over, if we can go, because this is going to lead us right into our small groups. So let's speed through slides. We're given, oh, and by the way, that is the attendance success plan. Keep going. These are all slides you'll get. So we're going to go into small group discussions. And we want you all, I think we'll give around 20 minutes to think about two things. One is, who are the chronically absent students in your district? How might you help them? And then what are the barriers you're doing? What are the barriers to doing this work? Maybe you share the same ones or different ones from what Erica just talked about, and how can you overcome them? So when you go into small groups, we're going to ask you to do a few things. You're going to turn on your camera briefly, just really briefly introduce yourself. You can raise your hand to speak, ask clarifying questions, explore differences of opinion, create space for everyone to speak. We have a Jamboard for notes. And so we'll put a link into the Jamboard, and the Jamboard is organized so that there's a preschool page, an elementary school page, a middle school page, a high school page, and then you can use little sticky notes. Hopefully you're all familiar with Jamboard. Someone is, so the person whose last name is closest to A, by the way, you get to make sure that everyone's getting a chance to speak. The person whose last name is closest to Z, you're gonna help take notes on the Jamboard and help make sure we can report out. And there'll be 2 questions on the Jamboard, and we'll put the Jamboard into chat so that you all can have access to it. And it'll be organized by preschool, elementary, middle, high. And with that, I'm gonna turn it back over to Stephen to tell you all how to get to your groups. And Stephen, I think you're talking, but you're muted, so none of us can hear you.
Usually I'm not muted, so now I'm muted. So good morning, everyone. So I have created the 4 breakout rooms. You're going to self-select by your choice, which is preschool, elementary, middle, and high school. So now let me put the Jamboard in, okay, into the chat. All right, the link is right here. And thank you again, Hetty and Erica, for that really great interview and dialogue. It was very, very informative. And I think there's many great strategies that came out of that. All right, so I just dropped the Jamboard in, and I'm going to open up the breakout rooms. Okay, you're going to self-select for 20 minutes. All right, open up all the rooms.
For
And we
those
go
of you
all the-
who might not be familiar with Jamboard, you scroll through the top of the,
Yeah.
so at the top of the slide, there's like slides, there's 6 of them. And make sure you're on the one that is the group that you've selected for your breakout. So there's labeled preschool, elementary, middle school, high school.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, there's 4 of them.
4. And just scroll all the way down and you can choose your room. Yep, here we go.
And if you're wondering how to choose your room, you'll see a little on the bottom of your screen, little box of 4. And then
Yep.
you click on that, and then it'll show you your breakout rooms, and you can decide what to join. And since, yeah, we're hoping more people will join your breakouts. Not sure we got our preschool community here, Stephen, given so far.
Okay, so
Yeah.
in elementary and middle. I'll put the Jamboard into the message for everyone.
That's great. Yep, our high schoolers are sort of the largest group right now.
Oh, wow. 21. Mhm.
Copy.
Stephen, I guess it's too small, too late to break our high school into 2, huh?
How many are in there? There's probably a lot, right?
Yeah,
16.
16.
I
Put them
don't
into
know.
move them to, can you move them to the preschool room?
Some of them?
Well, they're in the middle of a conversation. I hate
We'd probably have to tell them what's going on. If we just move them to preschool, they'll be like, what?
Right,
All
right.
right. So here's a message. I can broadcast a message. What do you want me to broadcast?
Well, I don't know. You know what? Let me, I'll go join them and see if they might,
That's
and we have to
Brandon.
we also have to decide real quick about how much time we want to be in the breakout. I'm thinking we can have a shorter of report out. So maybe make the report out only 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So let's still go 20 minutes. But do you want me to join the high school group and see if they,
Sure.
Yeah, we're gonna pull everybody back at 10 after, I think. That would be 20 minutes. What do you think?
Okay, so just
you could even make it little
15
okay.
after? You want me to go
And
15?
Shannon is trying to get to elementary. Is there anyone trying to get to something that they
yeah, 'cause
can't get?
I just moved her.
Okay. So I'll go check on the high
Yeah.
school and see if they need smaller or they seem fine.
Okay.
Yeah, elementary has like
Hi,
8.
Gladys.
Hi, Steve.
Hi
Hi,
there.
Jay. Sorry, I'm late. I was in another meeting.
That's all right.
I need to get into one of the rooms.
Okay, Jenny, which room do you want to go into? Elementary, middle, or high? Jenny, who needs to go into a room? Jenny? What room? Elementary, middle, or high?
High school.
High school.
You're there.
See you soon. Who else do we have left,
There's
Steve?
a few that may just not be in the space.
Right. They may
So,
have gotten distracted to something
right,
else.
so they have it
Right.
in, they have their meeting on.
Do you
but
want to
the-
turn the recording off right now, Steve?
Oh, I had that as a sign. I was supposed to do that. Sorry about that.
Bring those numbers down.
Great, thank you. And there are lots of ways we can make sure, Kari, that we get out information that incentives aren't necessarily always monetary. Sometimes incentives are things like you're first in the lunch line. You get to have lunch with your favorite staff member. There's all sorts of things. And then for parents, you can also recognize them and applaud them at school-wide events, different kinds of things. There are different ways. And the only other thing I would say about incentives, and I heard that in the meeting, is making sure they're in small increments. So it's a week of showing up every day, because especially with COVID, it can be challenging if you do it for too long of a period of time. Kids can't succeed. Really appreciate those ideas. I think what we'll do is focus on a couple of positive ideas. There's clearly, rich discussion. People can also take a look at the sticky notes to get a handle on both what some of the barriers were and some of the other solutions that you guys talked about. Let's go to the middle school.
Hi, Rachel here. I typed for our group. I think the big tenor of our conversation was that we want to try to be as positive and welcoming and with families as possible to help them recognize that we're partners in this, to try not to be punitive. We found that, and we heard from our speaker earlier, that doesn't generally work. And so, it's kind of connected to barriers. So barriers were, holding teams in schools who are responsible for attendance accountable, make sure they're looking at the data that they should, following up with case management and programs. One group listed that as a barrier. Lots of need, kids not having uniforms, they can't come to school if they don't have the proper clothes, for example. That there are no consequences for poor attendance. A student can be chronically absent and basically nothing happens. So that's what our supports were connected to. So knowing that, how do we encourage families to send their children to school every day, all year, and maybe not take that trip or let their child stay home for any reason but real illness. And I think that the biggest takeaway was we need to be as welcoming and positive with families as we can and let them know we respect them and their decisions and partner with them in helping their child get the best learning and preparation for the next grade that they can. But group members, feel free to jump in and correct me or add.
Anyone want to add before we turn to the high school group? All right, let's keep going, and we'll see if there's any questions at the end too.
Okay, I'm just going to pick one barrier and then talk about some of the strategies, and we can go from there. We had a really good conversation, but one of the barriers was the fact that at the high school level, which is unique from the other levels, is students who took jobs during the pandemic and then the families relying on that income. And there was definitely some great strategies that were shared. One of the things was partnering with businesses in the districts so that to ensure that their schedule for work after school hours, reminding employers of the laws regarding youth employment, age, times, those kinds of things. Also, again, the work piece, say in the summer, having summer school and then tying summer school attendance to employment after that. So I think it's really important to recognize what the student and family needs are and kind of being creative as to how do we support these students in their need for employment, but also recognizing the importance for schooling as well.
All right. Thoughts, reactions, questions for the high school group? Anyone from the high school group want to add anything? It was a very rich conversation.
The only thing I would add, Hetty, is I just want to commend everybody, at least in that group, and I'm sure it was the same in the other two groups. The passion behind all of you and your desire to really make impact was palpable. And at least in the high school group, the truly understanding of the unique needs of the communities that you serve and how we understand those and find the strengths and build on them. So even though we were addressing barriers, there was really a desire to truly understand why that barrier is in place and how to find a solution to it. So I just want to commend the thought process that was happening in those breakout spaces.
I'm also going to just tee up something because I know Kari was thinking about this, which is the 9th grade transition. And that's something that she's concerned about and trying to think about how to move it. But there was a lot of conversation in this one about, you have kids who are, more kids who are 9th graders this year than ever before. Kids who didn't get, so they were, because last year during the pandemic, when things were closed, they didn't get enough credits to actually move to 10th grade. So you have a huge 9th grade bubble that's really, really challenging. So just wanted to offer that was coming up. And I know, Kari, that's kudos for food for thought as you think about how to think about more supports, because the data is showing your high school kids are extremely challenged. Although again, what happens in elementary and middle is key because that's part of the prevention strategy. Other questions, thoughts for anyone? Let's close this part out, Stephen. But any reflections, thoughts about the small groups at all, or questions for each other? All right. In light of that, I'm going to keep going here. I wanted to make sure that you all knew about some current resources that we have available. We have a new spring attendance slump. It's a web page. You can link onto it. That's at the bottom of that page. It gives a letter, and this is pretty simple, straightforward, just about reminding people when spring break is, when it's back, and the importance of abiding by your spring break deadlines. Trying to encourage folks to not take their self-created vacations in some ways. Also thinking about how you can use activities to motivate kids coming back, fun activities at the beginning or at the end. You can again use our student attendance success plans. And then you can also even create a bit of a calendar. So next slide. These are ideas for special events you can do. That's one way to motivate kids. They want to come to school because it's going to be fun, engaging. And you can even do like this pantry pickup. We're talking about things that, how do we get families also incentivized? So you can see more ideas in the spring break, spring slump work toolkit or resources. Next slide. And then it's also helping you think about creating your school plan and putting a calendar. And this, I think, connects to what Erica had said earlier. If you can make it easy, if you can offer people in your schools, help them have a calendar, help give them 10 ideas, have them think about, then make it easy for them to come up with their ideas and implement them. Next slide. Oh, yeah.
I just had a quick question on the last slide, Steve. It says open the spring activities handout. Is that the same as the attendance slump resources?
Yeah, it's in the attendance slump resources. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
So if you go to that page, that it'll all be there.
Okay.
Next slide. And I think actually I'm going to turn it back to you, Kari, for any final thoughts before we do the closeout activity.
So thank you everyone for your attendance today. It's always wonderful to see you all. Being spring, it's it's been a tough year, and we're hoping we can finish strong. I think that's something we used to say a lot. We're gonna finish the year strong. So our next meeting is Thursday, April 21st. We are going to, as always, record it and send it out in case your school district is on vacation that week. I know the weeks are split between districts. So this was Erica's idea, and Erica, thank you. But this is how one of the administrators in Bristol's ends a lot of their meetings. So one of the things we'd like you to put into the chat is, I used to think X, but now I know Y. So what did you sort of learn to hear today? What sort of changed your thinking on something? And so I used to think something, but now I know something else. And if you want to share that in the chat, that would be, we'd be grateful for that. And thank you, Hetty, so much. Hetty Chang, our partner in all this work, and Erica, terrific work in Bristol. I'm sure you don't mind if folks follow up with you with questions regarding your presentation. Really good work. So, and Steve and all of our team here at the State Department, thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone, and happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you all. Great conversation, great dialogue.
Bye, Ronelle. Bye, Rachel. And the chat is coming in.
I will say that high school group, Kari, could be